discussing two presentations, one by Sergey Levine, Data-Driven Reinforcement Learning in Robotics. Sergey is doubling down on his idea of offline reinforcement learning as a way to leverage data in a supervised way and then use it in reinforcement learning. So he's combining those two aspects of machine learning. One is the supervised learning, the other is the reinforcement learning. And the hope is to find better trajectories into a complex environment. And I think related to this, Alex Havrilla, PhD student at Georgia Tech, he talks about how to teach large language models with reinforcement learning. And his finding in the paper that he's discussing is that most of the current algorithms that are helping to improve large language models, they are kind of deterministic in a sense that they don't take advantage of exploration as much as they should. So he's suggesting new ideas. Tree of thought is one of them. But I think in general, I think that the reason I like both of these presentations is, I think let's lean back for a second and just think about what is it we're trying to achieve and how can we improve what we call reinforcement learning, or in general optimization to get the better results. This is not even on podcast. It's April 22nd, 2024. This is Krim Delco for the Data Fund. Is down 1%. The market is up 80 basis points for We're down 33.2%. The market's up 5%. We're underperforming by 38.2%. Just before I go into the discussion, tomorrow is Tesla earnings. Not a lot to be excited about here, unfortunately. I think we have probably a kitchen sink top quarter to deal with. Musk has fired people. It's you know, he's a wartime CEO again. So the silver lining here is a wartime CEO, which means he's going back to sleeping on factory floors and doing all those things that are necessary to bring this company back on track. On the positive side, we have a good tech. FSD is good. My fear with FSD is that it's not compelling yet for people to take it. So it's a good technology. It's a bit like large language models and GPT. It's exciting. It's super exciting to see it in action, but it's not compelling. It's not like you can't live without it. For that, we need FSD native products and services. We discussed this in the past. We believe the company will eventually get there because once you have a good tech is a good tech, and it's just much better. It's safer. It does things that currently are maybe a little bit inhibiting on the traffic side, but long term, this is the way I think traffic needs to go. Tesla's at the forefront. We'll see some monetization one way or the other. Where the stock is today, I think it's tempting to say, well, we've kind of washed out most of the risk. I think that's usually not the case. I think the market likes to overreact and things like that. So it's probably another $20 downside here, but that remains to be seen. We'll see tomorrow. What we expect is, most importantly, I think, is a clear line of sight of where things are going, in particular with robotics, with AI, and then also what it means to navigate the current macro environment. I think this is a little bit of a risk in the sense that it's not under our control, so we have to deal with it. Higher interest rates, definitely a massive slowdown in the car market, particularly in China. So those are things that are hard to navigate, but they're navigatable. And that's, again, we have the tech on our side, which is good. We have exciting, actually, developments in robotics, in particular, on the science side, on the technology side, and then also on the company side, which I think should be enough to get us to a better place in the near future. Now let's talk about the first paper here, Sergey Levine's Data-Driven RL in Robotics. So the concept here is, think about it this way: we can capture. We have to do two things to improve AI from where it is today. One is we have to get better at representing reality. So we have to, one way or the other, get reality, nature, whatever's out there, into virtual space. Whether it's the virtual space in the control room of the robot, or whether it's a simulation engine on a server. We have to translate reality into virtual space. Take a self-driving car. Like, we have to be able to, let's say, have a map, ideally a semantic map, with roads, with buildings, with all that kind of stuff. People, the probability that people will be here versus there. Like, we have to kind of represent the world as what's possible, right? That's one thing we have to do. And people like large language models are doing this. The 2, the 3D translation people, the imaging people are doing this, particularly for simulation, but not just for simulation. This can also be done on policy. We have to be able to communicate to the robot what is an egg and how does it feel to touch an egg. We have to do that somehow, whether we do that through vision, through haptic sensing, and then through some vector translation, whether we use, cosine proximity or KL nearest neighbor. We have to work on those algorithms. So this is one task. The other task is the optimization. So once we know what's possible, we need to find the best trajectory. And this is where offline reinforcement learning comes in. And the beauty about offline reinforcement learning is that we can potentially learn from past interactions. We can learn from past interactions and have a representation of the optimal trajectories. So what that means is, think about it this way. Like, we could have a database of action and state tuples of a car. So in that state, this is what the car did. In that state, this is what it is. It's kind of like what imitation learning is, right? But the difference between imitation learning and offline reinforcement learning is that we do allow for exploration here. So we don't just want to imitate the driver. We want the system to explore. And I think ideally we want to do this in sim. And this is where AlphaGo Zero comes into play. If we could represent my path from my home to my next Whole Foods and have all the possible routes and all the possible things that could happen, including the Harry Potter worlds, and then we have simulation which simulates hundreds of millions of billions of trajectories of my car going from home to this Whole Foods, it will come up with a pretty good solution. Take a surgery situation where we have a robotic surgeon that has a good sense of what's possible. So the reality is well represented. The physics of tissues and blood and poking an artery and what it means and the pressure of the artery and the probability given the way the artery looks, how sensitive it is, and all kinds of things. It's all there. And, by the way, we can also improve our vision. Maybe we can get to the physics through vision. We can get to the physics through explicit heuristics, maybe. We've discussed this at length, actually, in the last 2 weeks. We can use control theory, we can use heuristics and physics, or we can just go the other route. Like Ferenc Krauss just today at Stanford Slack was talking about attosecond physics. How about that? And detecting cancer. How about having very, very fine-grained vision, temporally fine-grained vision, so we can see how electrons move. That's how fine-grained we are. Is there a potential that we could detect physics from there, or things like cancer, or morphology or pathology? I'm digressing now, but the point is that we can improve our sensing to the extent that we can represent the world. Again, what reinforcement learning really is, it's an optimization over possible trajectories. So before we throw reinforcement learning onto a robot, we have to somehow represent the real world to the robot. Now, whether that is on policy or not is not even that important, because even an on-policy reinforcement learning algorithm, which means that while the robot is going through nature, it's being updated and it's getting rewards and things, even there the robot has to still see the world or feel the world or understand the world, right? So even there. But of course, we want to do this off policy as much as we can, and ideally in sim. Now, what Sergey is suggesting is, I think, kind of like a hybrid. Offline RL is like it's like supervised learning. It's like we have a bunch of data. Let's say we have a data set of people driving from my home to the next Whole Foods, but we have a data set of people driving, period. And we train our agent based on those types of trajectories that are available. We use Q-learning because we have the trajectories. So let's say the agent that is driving from his house in New York to JFK Airport, she's gonna get rewards for doing whatever she's doing and get punished for whatever she's doing and so on and so forth, like in a typical reinforcement learning fashion. And the hope is, and there's some evidence that there's some transfer learning here, that if we have enough data and a deep enough data set, that we can pre-train an agent with reinforcement learning. So this is pre-training the agent with reinforcement learning to then have a better chance to fine-tune the agent to do much better. Now the end goal of this is to find better trajectories, to really have the most optimal way, in fact, maybe even a superhuman way. And this is not about superhuman AGI, none of that stuff. It's just really about, okay, we have tools at our disposal to improve certain jobs. Right now we're in the field, whether it's surgery or driving or flying or things like boring jobs that can be improved, right? Or maybe very finely dexterous jobs like in surgery that maybe are very difficult for humans to do. But this is just the beginning. And I think the key to the solution to better RL models is finding a better balance between exploration and exploitation. It's really about that. It's exploration versus exploitation. This brings me to the second paper I want to discuss, which is Alex Havrilla's paper on how to teach LLMs with RL. And the gist of this paper is the same. The current algorithms that are being used, PPO and others such as expert interaction, I believe EI, and then there's a couple of others, DPO is one of them, reinforcement learning with human feedback, all of them are pretty deterministic. And what he finds in this paper is that they converge pretty quickly. In other words, there isn't much of a difference between these algorithms, which on the one hand is concerning, which means we're sometimes maybe spending compute power and intellectual power, and we're having orals at conferences and accolades, and people get jobs and tenure for papers that really aren't adding much. This paper is an important paper. It's a paper also about, hey, what are we doing here? Is this really bringing science further? Aren't we just regurgitating the same thing, giving it different names, EI versus DPO versus PPO, blah, blah, blah. So let's put that in mind. Just to sort of, this is the tangent now, but I think there's a big inflation in papers being written, particularly in AI and reinforcement learning and the LLMs and things like that. And there's every now and then, there's something that I catch on, which is, hey, this is really interesting. And most of the time it's like the same old, just in different packages. And I think the biggest compliment that I can give a scientist is she made me think or work. She made me work. Think is, it's a B plus and work is an A plus. And that's how I decide whether a certain scientist is interesting to me or not. And I think I promised a podcast about sort of a chart of professors, right? Who do I really think is worth listening to? Sergey, Jitendra, Peter at Berkeley, Ken to some extent. And then at Stanford, it gets a little thinner. I would say Dorsa for sure, Chris Ree, very interesting. There's the evergreens, Percy Liang and Fei Li, of course, but those are like, it's like saying Led Zeppelin is worth listening to, right? Yeah, duh. Drew Batra at Georgia Tech. There is Tianmin He at just started at MIT. I think he's interesting. Dieter Fox at UW, interesting. So this would be my top, whatever, almost top 10. And they all do the same thing to me. They make me want to work. Maybe not all of them. Like Dieter he makes me think. Dorsa makes me want to work. Sergey and Jitindra and Peter, they make me want to work. So that's, sorry for the tangent. Back to this paper. So anyway, the conclusion in Alex's paper is actually very similar to Sergey's. We need more exploration. How can we find better ways to explore? And the best way to find ways to explore is really to have simulation. Now, simulation in itself, of course, it's not going to solve, the world. Simulation has to be done in a smart way. First, we have to represent reality as real as we can, at least as far as it's relevant for the robot. What I mean with that is, look, we don't have to explain the intricacies of quantum mechanics through vision. That's not important. But it's important for the robot to understand what it means to hold an egg. So as far as that's concerned, it's important for a car to understand what it means to drive in a curve at a certain speed with the tires that it has and things like that. So the physics are important. And then sim is also about trajectories. One way is the Tesla way, is collect the data in your fleet. There's another way, which is generative AI. We have this ability right now, so let's take advantage of it. Let's use video as a generation tool for much more trajectories and then learn from them. So that would be my suggestion for sim, and then we can think about the algorithms in RL. And there, I think we need to do more work on exploration. I think that's the key. And to me, it's a lot more subtle than it might seem, because this goes really into I would say this goes into the conversation of what is creativity, because to me that's what creativity really is. Even David Deutsch, when he talks about the paper bin, which is the proof that art is as exploratory and Popperian as, let's say, science. What he means with that is that Beethoven's 5th or 6th or 8th or whatever was written, and he tried many iterations. Like this, art is very similar to science, and it converges to something, and that something, that's exploration, right? You explore. And then we call it creative because it's new and it's amazing. I mean, take Picasso's Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, which was a struggle. It was a struggle. The same way, today Ferenc Krauss, he said he was struggling with attosecond physics for decades until it worked. Like, good stuff is a start. Elon Musk is struggling now with getting Tesla turning into a robotics company. It's not supposed to be easy. It requires iteration, it requires making mistakes. Difficult to do as a public company, but necessary to create wealth. That's what we signed up for. Back to my episode here. So to summarize, Sergey Levine and Alex Havrilla both talk about reinforcement learning from different angles. Sergey mentions the offline reinforcement learning as a path towards improving trajectories through reinforcement learning, basically getting more data and collecting data in different fields. For example, doctor interactions with patients could be logged and then used for agents to improve medical advice. We could use reinforcement learning for pre-training. Let's say pre-train a car with reinforcement learning, offline reinforcement learning, and then fine-tune it with online reinforcement learning. Alex Havrilla talks about it from a different perspective, but comes to the same conclusion. How can we teach LLMs with reinforcement learning? And the conclusion is we need to find better ways for exploration. Keep the exploitation. Of course, we don't want to unlearn. We don't want to have catastrophic forgetting and things like that. But we need to find a way to build on knowledge. We need to find a way to build on what we have and get better through exploration. Thank you.